No matter what you set your sights on doing or becoming, mastering the ability to learn will get you in the game and keep you there. To master the ability to learn, you need to upgrade your ineffective learning techniques. If you've ever reread your notes before a test, you relied on an ineffective learning technique. Rereading notes is the number one study strategy for over 80% of college students, but according to empirical evidence, it doesn't do much. In the book Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning, cognitive scientists Henry Roediger and M.McDaniel explain why popular learning methods, like rereading, are learning illusions that don't lead to subject mastery, and how you can incorporate 3 proven learning techniques into your study and practice sessions to retain more information and attain subject mastery. Learning technique number 1, self-quizzing. I hated pop quizzes in middle school. I hated pop quizzes because I had to retrieve information from memory. My memory is terrible. But even though I hated those pop quizzes, they actually made me smarter. In a 2011 study published in the Journal of Educational Psychology, a class of middle school students reviewed their notes 3 times before taking an exam. That class had a C+ average on the exam. But when a similar class of middle school students completed 3 pop quizzes before taking the same final exam, they had a class average of A-. When you take a quiz, you're more likely to make information stick. Because when you take a quiz, you're forced to dig into the depths of your knowledge to retrieve information. In the book, the authors say, the harder it is for you to recall new learning from memory, the greater the benefit of doing so. The effort of retrieving knowledge strengthens its staying power. We don't need to wait for someone to hand us a quiz to strengthen our learning. We can simply start self-quizzing. I started self-quizzing while listening to audiobooks. I pause the audio every 20 minutes and silently ask myself, what were the key ideas? And which of those ideas were new to me? Then I ask myself, how can I use those ideas in my life? If I'm at home or walking outside, I'll take up my phone, hit the voice dictation icon on my iPhone, and record my best answer. I have to admit, I feel stupid when I do this because I find it so difficult to recall details I just heard. But research shows that you and I forget roughly 70% of what we read and hear shortly after we learn it. Our minds are in a constant state of forgetting. When you self-quiz, you use the limited amount of information you can recall to navigate your way back to the information you've forgotten. If learning were like exploring a new land, then self-quizzing would be like trying to retrace your steps back to the lake of knowledge. By putting in the effort to find a path back to the knowledge you want to retain, you reset the forgetting curve and decrease your rate of forgetting. After this video, before we go on to the next video, take a minute to quiz yourself and silently answer the questions. What were the key ideas in that video? Which of those ideas were new to me? And how can I immediately start using those ideas? Proven learning technique number 2, interleaving. If you were learning Spanish and you were trying to learn a new Spanish phrase, should you try to repeat the phrase and perfect it before you move on to the next Spanish phrase? Well, according to the latest science of learning, the answer is no. If you want to learn and retain a new Spanish phrase, you should interleave similar phrases into your Spanish practice sessions. This would involve writing down 5 Spanish phrases on 5 different flashcards. As you practice, you go from flashcard to flashcard without repeating a single phrase. Your goal is to go from phrase to phrase in a random order until you can recall all 5 phrases perfectly. By interleaving similar phrases, you force your brain to use extra effort to spot the similarities and the differences between each of those phrases. In Make It Stick, the authors explain that a baseball player who practices batting by swinging at 15 fastballs, and then 15 curveballs, and then at 15 changeups will perform better in practice than the player who goes between the 3 pitches in a random order. But the player who asks for random pitches during practice builds his ability to decipher and respond to each pitch, and he becomes the better hitter. So instead of focusing on one skill and trying to master that skill before moving on to the next skill, focus on 3 similar skills and try to master all 3 as you switch between them. If you wanted to learn graphic design and master graphic design software programs like Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, and Adobe After Effects, don't try and master one program at a time. Instead, get good at all 3 simultaneously. Do Photoshop on Monday and Friday, do Illustrator on Tuesday and Thursday, and do After Effects on Wednesday and Saturday. If you're learning how to golf, don't hit the same club twice on the driving range. Instead, constantly switch between clubs. And if you're learning how to cook, don't focus on mastering one meal. Instead, aim to master 5 similar meals and never cook the same meal twice in a row. Proven learning technique number 3, spacing. Going back to the Spanish example, do you think it would be more effective to practice a Spanish phrase 50 times today or 5 times every day for the next 5 days? If you chose to stretch the practice over 5 days, you'd only put in half the repetitions, but you would increase the odds that you'd remember that phrase when you visit Spain. Spacing your repetitions is better than mass repetition. Scientists call this phenomenon the spacing effect. A college professor who wants to maximize his students' retention could use the spacing effect by scrapping the midterm and instead give his students 9 tests spaced throughout the semester, where half of each test tests new concepts and the other half tests concepts from previous tests. The students would be forced to revisit material at spaced intervals throughout the semester, which would improve their retention and reduce the need to cram for the final exam. If you're taking a workshop and you want to remember a list of key concepts from that workshop, create a list of those key concepts inside a calendar event and schedule that event 3 times in the future. Pick 3 dates you expect to start forgetting each concept. When I encounter information I want to retain, I schedule a self-quiz the next day, the next week, and the next month. When the event pops up on my phone, I look at the list of concepts in that event and try to explain each concept from memory. I only return back to my notes after I've tried to explain each concept. Now, why are self-quizzing, interleaving, and spacing effective learning techniques? And why are they so much better than conventional learning techniques like rereading and mass repetition? The answer is simple. Rereading and mass repetition are too easy. In the book, the authors explain, the more you repeat in a single session, the more familiar it is, and the less you struggle to remember it. Therefore, the less you learn. Learning that's easy is like writing in sand. Here today, gone tomorrow. But self-quizzing is hard because you forget 70% of what you've listened to or read very quickly. Interleaving is hard because the brain has to work hard to decipher between the similar skills you're practicing. And spacing is hard because if you allow enough time to pass, you get rusty and require effort to reconstruct an old concept or skill from memory. The harder your brain has to work to retrieve information, the more likely it is to stick. Effort equals retention. That was the core message that I gathered from Make It Stick. I highly recommend this book to any student, teacher, or lifelong learner. If you would like a 1-page PDF summary of insights that I gathered from this book, just click the link below and I'd be happy to email it to you. If you already subscribe to the free Productivity Game email newsletter, this PDF is sitting in your inbox. If you like this video, please share it. And as always, thanks for watching and have yourself a productive week.